in the session room, one of the things I talk about, in the beginning, we talk about always reinforcing how people should be open and honest in the session. And one of the other things I talked about that actually a different implementer had mentioned to me, and I stole from her, but is the difference between being nice and kind. We want to be nice to people, and we conflate that with being kind. And sometimes being kind is actually saying the hard thing because we're saying it for the other person's benefit.
Welcome to Confessions of an Implementer. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. We share unique stories of EOS implementers and the companies they've transformed to give you a rare glimpse into the successes and challenges of the system in action. Let's jump in.
Matt, when I was looking at your LinkedIn, the one thing that struck me, and the one thing that I noticed, is you have spent a lot of time in the automotive and aerospace. Was that like a passion? How did you land on that?
No. So anyway, my background, engineering degree, right? I'm obvious from LinkedIn. So I loved engineering, still do. Haven't done it forever, forgotten half of everything. But I just loved machines. That's why I was actually a biochem major for 2, 3 years in college, and horrible grades because, right, we would talk about GWC. I did not W a degree in biochemistry, so I didn't study. And then I got into engineering, and there's a whole story about that. And I loved it, right? Um, but so when I was young, I went to work. Um, I worked for a really small company before I went to grad school. I went to grad school and then worked for a different one. And when I went to this after grad school, this little bit bigger company, um, it was I'd seen like GE and people had like these leadership rotation programs. Right? Every 6 months, you go to a different place, and this company didn't have that. But I wanted to move up the ranks over time, and so I was like, you know what? I'm going to make my own program. And so, and what in my head, being like all 25 years old, thinking I figured out the world, I was like, well, I want to be an engineer and I want to be a competent engineer. So I'm going to do that until I feel like I'm competent enough. Right. And then I need to know how to go out and find good business and close sales. And then I need to know how to run operations or a factory or, that kind of stuff. And then they'll give me really good background so I can, hopefully one day run a business. And so company I worked at that time, like amazing engineering experience, world class engineers, learned so much from them, doing really super complex, really cool things like earthquake simulators and all sorts of wild stuff. Super fun engineering job. But it's also a really specialized niche. And so at a certain point, I started moving in and business development and stuff like that. And I was like, I think I want to know more about how to be a really good business person because this is a really unique niche. And so they don't have to be so strong in certain areas. And so I left. I went to work for a company called Goodrich. Goodrich did not make tires at that time. They only did aerospace. Yeah. Michelin bought the Goodrich brand in like the 90s or something. And so Goodrich, pure play aerospace and defense company back then. And doesn't exist. They were bought. And so Goodrich is gone. But I went, that's how I got into aerospace for the most. Well, actually, I guess there was a project I did where developed a new process on how to build airplanes without rivets. That was a whole thing before Goodrich. That was super fun. Um, but that's how I got into aerospace and just did that for a long time.
That's wild. There are so many things you just said there that I had no idea. I had no idea that Goodrich was in aerospace. Everybody knows BF Goodrich for the tires, and wow. Is there? I talked to my son and actually all of my kids about this a lot because they're trying to figure out college and schools, and one thing I always talk to them about is in college it's really about learning a skill set, learning about things, but really gaining that maturity and the clarity and the what you need to go out into the real world. And I'm always speaking from a place of when I first got into college, it was an English major because the business school wouldn't let me in. And then the business school let me in, and all the things that they taught me were sort of irrelevant. We were still learning about billboards and out of home advertisement when like social media was like it. And so I always have this like preconceived notion of like there's a whole different element or purpose to college. But I didn't go to college for engineering. And I'm assuming that not only did you learn a lot of things that were very technical that applied, are there things that came out of that engineering education that like later applied to things that were outside of actual engineering?
Totally. You know, so my dad was an engineer as well. He was, and he used to always say that all your degree really does is it tells you how to solve problems and how to think. And as a young engineer, I knew all sorts of formulas and everything, but you didn't really know how to apply it because you didn't, it's all theory. But the thing that I've carried with me all these years is it's a way of solving problems. It's how to break down a thing, right? You got a problem, you got an issue. How do we break it down? How do we make sense of it? And then how do we create a plan to go ahead and tackle that? And that is probably the one lesson that I've taken from engineering that I still carry with me all these years later is I spent a lot of years basically learning how to break down problems.
Yeah. Which seems very, very valuable. Maybe that's what I should be telling the kids right now is like go do engineering because not only will you get all those things that I talked about, but you'll actually get a tangible set of skills, which is how to solve complex issues.
That's all it is. But yeah, my first couple years in college, they were I learned a lot on how much alcohol my body could absorb.
Yes. I was like Billy Madison back in college because I had I already had kids, and if I would have gone to college like at 18, I would have flunked out. There was no way. I didn't possess the maturity, actually I had really nothing going for me. And so I joined the Navy. The Navy gave me a lot, and then 10 years later I went into college. And so I used to look at all of the cool kids that would come in hungover in their Uggs, and I was like, I got to go home today to a household of three kids and a dog.
I probably I needed a little bit of maturity when I started. It took me a couple years. Unfortunately, my kids are not like me. They're much more mature than I am.
There, there you go. What when as you're navigating, so you get a degree in engineering, and then you go do some really cool work in the aviation um, space. Like, what are some other things that came along with that experience? Because we're going to get to the place of where you became an EOS implementer and all the amazing work that you're doing today. But I'm assuming, and especially looking at your LinkedIn profile, I think there was something in there around like you were leading or managing 300 people, a division at a certain point. So, like, what did that transition look like of like hands-on solving complex problems to like now those problems are people?
So the one thing, yeah, and it wasn't a division; it was just a big program using aerospace words. But I think the thing that was kind of the thread throughout my career is I've always ended up taking on hard problems. Um, I don't know. Maybe it was because I'm stubborn and wouldn't give up on things, or maybe it was people saw that as something I could do. I don't know why I ended up, but I usually got the stuff that, for whatever reason, I was breaking new ground. So for example, I mentioned I developed that process that could build airplanes without rivets. And I remember, like, I was young, right out of grad school. Somebody said, "Hey, there's a thing." I'm like, "Okay, I'll go do this thing," right? And nobody knew how to. I remember sitting in a room with a bunch of super experienced Boeing engineers that had done some R&D stuff, and I was talking to them about how they did it and try to learn whatever they'd actually share with me. I remember they said, "We don't think this can be done." And so a year later, we had a customer who committed the design of an airplane to actually build it using this process. Myself and other people, we figured it out. And I think it's just a bit of stubbornness and hard work and a little bit of luck and everything else. And that's the thing that's been through my whole career is usually sometimes it's mistakes I've caused myself that I got solved and created my own hard problems. But that's kind of what's been the only common thread in my career through everything else is I end up in a situation where I'm supposed to solve something and just tackle it through stubbornness and hard work.
there's an interesting kind of like thread there because there's this old story, and like who knows if it's true, but we'll assume that it's true, where Henry Ford needed a certain type of glass, and everybody on the floor said like we can't do that. What you're asking for is impossible. And so the story goes is that he fired everybody that said it wasn't possible, and he brought in a whole bunch of people who were like, I don't know, we'll give it a shot. Like why, like what did you see that other people couldn't see?
I'd love to say that I had some outstanding vision and I could see the path. Like I'd love if that was how it was, but that's I'm neither smart enough nor clairvoyant enough to honestly say that. I remember when I graduated grad school, took my first job after grad school, my mom gave me this little leather placard thing, like lean it on my desk kind of deal, and it said, "It can be done." And that's kind of my motto. It can be done. Now, sometimes believing it can be done has let me stay in things longer than I should have because I stubbornly believed it could be done. And sometimes wisdom tells you it really can't, like give up. But usually I just stick with it. I keep gnawing on something when there's this thing where, like, let's say I have an idea or a thing, right? And sometimes those things rattle around my head for a long time. But once it rattles around enough, I guess I've learned enough to say of myself to say that that's a real thing. And so we're going to work on it. And so the only thing I'm right, there's people that are smarter than me, more charismatics, talk better, like all the things, right? I'm pretty average in a lot of ways. Um, but the only thing that I'm really good at is when I commit to something, I'm going to work it. And I'm going to run into problems. I'm going to run into obstacles. And if that way doesn't work, I'll find a different way. And that's the only thing that I'm good at is I'll just keep working at. There's this kind of thing that I call it glacial perseverance, right? Glaciers will just grind on things until they make these huge valleys, right? Make huge changes. And that's the only thing that I'm good at is I'll just keep working it and working it and working it, and eventually we'll solve it. That's the only thing I'm good at.
Do you have a trademark on that, by the way? Because I love this glacial perseverance. I think that's actually going to be the title of the show now, by the way.
Maybe I should. Maybe go to trademark, go in the U.S. Patent Trademark Office right now and do it before you post it.
There you go. Yeah, just I'll give you a royalty to use it for this episode. Oh gosh, that's really good. It I'm assuming you didn't go alone on these journeys, and there's a couple other things at play here. So there's the leadership aspect of this. So you're going to solve a very hard problem. You're going to do so from a place of like we're just going to figure it out. Right now, nobody's been able to figure it out, but we're going to figure it out. And so there's the aspect of bringing people along with you, and then there's also the aspect of there's a whole bunch of people that believe what you're doing can't be done. And I'm assuming that these aren't young, fresh out of college. These are people that have been working this problem or working in this industry or engineering solutions for decades. How do you navigate that? How do you inspire people that like, yes, we can solve this? And also, how do you not piss every single person off inside of that organization?
The way I handle it, I'd love to say that I have some beautiful system. Again, I go back to this thing. You're giving me way more credit than I deserve. I the way I work it is I just talk to people, right? I just talk to people and explain and understand and what are your problems and what is happening. I mean, sometimes people find that annoying, right? Kind of consider it a bit of a pain in the ass. Why won't this guy just leave me alone? But that's how I learn. One of my core values, like EOS, we have our core values for EOS, and we talk to our clients about that. I have personal core values, and one of them is enjoyment through learning. I have a lot of fun just learning through things. Another one is growth through hard challenges. Right? That's another big one. And so I just talk to people and ask questions and learn things and explain what we're trying to do, and there's a piece of that, so hopefully they can understand why I'm asking what they're asking so they can see their place in it. And then also there's a little bit of stubbornness, like we're also just going to do this. And so sometimes we get to go along, and sometimes we're going to push. And that's about all it is. I wish it was more sophisticated. I'm sure there's people that are much better at that than I am, but that's how I've always done it. And sometimes people do get pissed off. I've had plenty of stories where people get grumpy, and then there's other stories where we were like magical project where everybody works together and was everybody in it together. And we've had them all. I've had them all.
Have you ever had a circumstance where you were a bit more into that push and it's like, hey, I've tried to get everybody on the same page. Like I've done the best that I could. We've exhausted all avenues and now we just got to go. And so like we went from this like building support, we got to go. And then here's the crazy part because I'm sure there's many times where you've like pushed and pulled. Have you ever been wrong in the direction that you've taken it?
All the time. I'm wrong all the time, constantly wrong. One example is this is like over a decade ago. Company I was at, I remember I was running a big program, blah blah blah, this kind of stuff. And anyway, the company I was working at, we had my it's a big corporation. My program was the biggest for this particular customer and the corporation, and they wanted to have more businesses and divisions to have business there. So we were kind of the lead, and we got exposed to here's an opportunity, could bring in some sister companies with it, sister sites. And I remember the manager for the purchasing manager, he'd be like, okay, there's this thing. Um, but he actually said the words, there will be blood, you will be in trouble, and people will be pissed off at you. Do you want it? And like after I hear that 3 or 4 times, I remember we were far into the RFP, right? We were right down to getting close. And I went to my boss, the president, and I'm like, hey, this is not us. Like this is not in our sweet spot. We do a different thing than they're asking us to do. I think it's a mistake. And he said, hey, okay, so you're gonna be a quitter? I'm like, boink, push that button. I was like, all right, let's go do it. Giant mistake. Should have pushed back. It was ugly because it wasn't our sweet spot. Lots of bad things happened. Some of the customers, some of us, some of sister sites, lots of messiness. One point we were the third worst supplier to this particular customer, big company, and lots of bad things. I remember going into a meeting with, at the end of the day, CEO, multi-billion-dollar company was there, my EVP, a different EVP, a couple presidents, then little old me, right, briefing the customer. At the end of the day, our CEO was really mad, and we were briefing him on. My EVP had to leave, and I walk him out. He's in the car getting ready to go. He's like, "Be ready, right? Shit's hitting the fan." Like, scared to death. And anyway, so that was one of those circumstances where, I had people higher up the chain basically saying, don't spare any cost, fix it. Okay. So at that point, I had my peers in different functional groups. I'm fixing it. I don't care what toes I step on. These people that report to you, they now are my people, and we're going to go do it. And we worked together. And the team I had, we became a really great team. Um, but in that case, it didn't matter. We were going to fix it, and it was a lot of hard work, and it was super super stressful, and it took a while to do it, but we fixed it. We got to 100% on time delivery, got everything cleared. But that was one of those situations where it kind of started where I made a mistake not pushing back in the first place, saying we need to talk about this, and that was my failure.
It's great that you figured out how to solve it and that the organization not only empowered you but trusted you to take a whack at this and go and fix it. How do you get the people that were under you at that point, so the people that were like watching this happen, and maybe some of them were like, hey, we're moving in the wrong direction, hey, we're doing this but we should be doing this, and so you've got a lot of people that may have believed like, hey, I saw this coming a mile away, but big corporate people couldn't see it, whatever. How do you regain their trust to bring them along on this new journey?
So I'm not a micromanager. I ask a lot of questions, but I'm not necessarily telling people what to do. I'm trying to synthesize things in my head and provide guidance where possible. But I ask a lot of questions, but I'm not telling people what to do. And so a lot of times, um, I think that helps people. For example, there was a young guy became a project manager on this. He earned his stripes. Like his reputation in the company like went many times, and it wasn't because of me. I just gave him space. He stepped in the void and he showed what he can do. And there was a lot of other people in the team that did the same thing. And so that's kind of what we did, right? I'd ask a lot of questions and I'd say, "This is the bar. We need to get to the bar, right? And we'll figure it out." And I think that helped a lot.
And then how do you go from all of this? Like, where did you hear about EOS? You're doing amazing things in the aviation space and building rivetless aircraft, like doing really cool stuff. And then you just like EOS appeared. How did that come about?
Yeah, that was at a time where so I left the big companies and I went to run a small business for a while for an owner. Um, and through that experience, I realized in the big company. So 20 years ago, when I was working at Goodrich, they had a thing called a certified lean practitioner. Right, so it's a whole process, and you get classes and some mentoring and things like that, and you'd learn how to lead lean events, and you'd be a facilitator. And I also then adapted some of what we did in lean events to some strategy stuff and some product management strategy type stuff, right? And adapted it in different ways and used it in different ways. Um, and so that was kind of, and they had an operating system. It's called the Goodrich operating system. So that was kind of my first exposure to operating systems. And so fast forward, I was running that small business. It was like, okay, people haven't come up. A lot of these people had been in this business, but they hadn't necessarily been exposed to bigger company ways of doing things. And and so I knew how to do it in a big company, but it didn't work the same in a little company. Like I could these things didn't translate. And so I saw the pain there. But the other thing is, I also started to explore and think about like what did I when I've been working for companies. I was 51 or two or something like that, whatever it was at the time, and started to think, what do I want to do? And so a guy who used to be an implementer a number of years ago, and he went off on his own a few years ago, but um, he turned me on to a book that really explored that about, you know, a lot of people come to a point in their transition point in their career where they think like, what do I really want to do? And the way that it talked about was a lot of people in the beginning of your career, you talk about accomplishments, titles, awards, stuff, right? And in the end, and at the second half of career, a lot of people start to look at what is the impact you want to make. And that's where I started to think about like, well, yeah, I don't want to just make profit for people. I don't really care about managing people or how many people or whatever the title is. I want to focus on what I want to do, and that's really helping people. That's my third core value is service through mentorship. And so that's when I also this person started telling me about EOS. And I was like, oh, as I read traction and everything, I saw all the parallels with the Goodrich operating system because there were a lot of things like they had a people philosophy and the people like there was parallels, but it was different but similar. And then the experience of facilitating was like, you know what? This sounds like something I'd really love to do because I get to focus on just helping people. And I love teaching. Whenever I've been volunteer, I've always ended up being as a mentor, a coach, a teacher, or something like that. Um, and they kind of all came together. So I have a different route to EOS than a lot of people do, but it all makes sense to me.
that's 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 all that matters. Um, what when you discovered traction in the book and saw the correlations of what you had experienced at Goodrich, were you still leading the smaller organization at that point?
No, I'd left. I wasn't there anymore.
Got it. Um, you've talked I think it's come up maybe 3 or 4 times now, this idea of your own core values. And I think a lot of times, like especially when we're talking on EOS and we talk about the business and business have core values and that drives core behaviors and like that's ultimately what makes the business successful. Um, when did you start really thinking deeper about your core values? Because like you said, that's my number three core value. So like you obviously have a list somewhere and you have them documented. Like when did you do that?
So I started back in about 2019. I worked with I had an executive coach I worked with for a while, and he was like, "Hey, let's talk about it." I don't remember the exact. He didn't really talk about it in terms of values, I think, or I- maybe not. I don't remember, but kind of we did an exercise and what was important to me and kind of that stuff, And that was back in it was 2019. That was when I started to work at, and then for the next 4 or 5 years, again, it would kind of every once in a while it would kind of bubble up and rattle around. And over time, it got more and more firm about, hey, these core values, maybe those aren't really core. They're important, but not core. And then this is how I really word them, right? And and just like when we talk with our clients, like when we talk about core focus, one of the things we talk about is core focus. You might nail it in 20 minutes or it might take you 2 years. I think core values, we can get to the heart of it pretty quickly, but we continue to sort of work on it. That's why every quarter, every annual, we go back to that and we talk about, are those the right core values? Because, and that's the process I went through for 5 years to finally get down to the three core values that I think, and the way I write them and think about them, that really matter to me and make sense.
All right, quick break, friends. Do you find it impossible to hire and retain top sales talent? Or worse, are you paying insane recruiter fees who are all using outdated hiring processes? Yeah, I was too. At Hunt to Killer, we were spending hundreds of thousands on recruiter agency fees. And after I sold that company in 2025, I started Talent Harbor. And the whole vision here was to make sales recruiting accessible to small and medium sized businesses because the organizations that can hire and retain world class people are the ones that ultimately win. Most organizations rely on things like ZipRecruiter or LinkedIn, and they get hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes. But we find that the best salespeople are already perfectly placed somewhere else. And that's why our approach is to go after them. And we do that through a business model called recruiting as a service. We do not charge commissions. We do not have success fees. We don't have contracts. We don't have long-term engagements. And we become an extension of your team as expert sales recruiters. If you're tired of the same old recruiters and want to actually grow your sales team, check us out at talentharbor.com. That's Talent Harbor, TALENTHARBOR.com. Let's get your next sales superstar hired.
This is now maybe the second or third conversation I've had over the last week with this magical number three. And like the one thing that sticks out to me is the Navy. So I've been in the Navy now for 23 years, and it is very simple: honor, courage, and commitment. It's three. It's top of mind. You can correlate. You can do all of these different things. And now I've been hearing this idea of threes a lot. And so when a company's figuring out their core values, like sometimes there's five and then sometimes there's seven, and you got it all over the place. Like, what do you believe the right number is?
The right number is what resonates for those people. I think, I think I do believe less is more, but if it's four, if it's five, great. If it's three, that's fine too. But make sure, right? I think sometimes we talk about, hey, 3 to 7 core values. So people are like, oh, well, I've only got five. So I'm going to do another one and I'm going to add another one, right? And because I can get seven. I think that's where you really got to do the hard work. And that's why you have to go back, right? That's why we talk about all the time. Because there's important things and there's core things, and those are different. And for me, it happened to be three. But it's really what's right for the person. I think that's, or the company, the group, the leadership team, whatever. I think it's an individual choice for them, but you got to do the hard work to really be clear about what's important.
And one of the things that you said is there was a point in which you had more, and then you had been going through this exercise over time where you're like, I mean, that's important to me, but I wouldn't say that's like a core value. Like, how how did you do those tough exercises? Like it was there a benchmark? Was it a feeling? How did you really start to say like this is important, but it's not that important?
Well, one of the final steps that helped to really clarify it, because I'd kind of messed around and you doodle and then you wouldn't think about it for 6 or 7 months and it kind of rattle around. That's kind of how it works for me. But when I was doing through this process of like, what is the impact I want to make? I also did, right? You've probably heard of Unique Ability 2.0. So I went through that exercise. And when I asked a whole bunch of people that knew me and loved me, coworkers and friends, like, what do I do good? Like, scary process to ask. I mean, isn't that weird though? Like you go ask somebody that you like and likes you, and you ask, what do you think of me? And you're scared to death. They're gonna say, you're the biggest asshole I've ever met, right? Like in your head, that's the story you tell yourself, and you get nice things back. So of course they like me. They're not gonna be jerks. But anyway, I went through that process and a lot of different assessments and all sorts of things. And as I looked at it, those things started to really bubble up. And those were the things that really finally started to crystallize at the end. That makes sense for me.
Your comments on asking other people for feedback, like I I don't know why that's such a big fear. Like it's a fear with me, and maybe it's just human nature. But like to your point, this is one of the exercises that happens as you're going through quarterly pulses and onboarding of EOS. But like a leadership team has to sit around across the table from each other and say, like, you know, what's one thing we could have, like, Henry over here stop doing today, for the betterment of the team. For me, it was, the weird part is, like, I thrive in critical feedback. Like I would love for everybody to tell me how I can improve, because that gives me actionable things. But I have a very hard time telling other people how they can improve, even though I know how they can improve. But that makes me feel very awkward. Hey, how do you overcome some of that stuff, whether personally or in the session room?
For me, I wish I would. I've had to learn to get better, right? Because it's a scary to break through that kind of glass wall a little bit. In the session room, one of the things I talk about, in the beginning, we talk about always reinforcing how people should be open and honest in the session. And one of the other things I talk about that actually a different implementer had mentioned to me, and I stole from her, but um, is the difference between being nice and kind. We want to be nice to people, and we conflate that with being kind. And sometimes being kind is actually saying the hard thing because we're saying it for the other person's benefit. And so I talk about that when I launch sessions now to remind people why it's important to be all of these different things or be aware of these things. And I remember I was in a session with a client. It was our second session, so it was the first vision building day, and and we were talking about accountability chart, and it was interesting. I could see everybody was sort of dancing around about what they were trying to talk about. I was like, you know what? You guys warm my heart. You're being so nice. It's so lovely to see how nice you're being. Talk about the real issue. You're not being kind. You're being just too nice.
I love it. What's, like, when you're sitting in the vision building days, and you're the early days of your clients, like, what are some of the hardest things, not that they grapple with, but like, what are some of the common challenges you have as you're taking a company kind of through this process from scratch?
It can come in so many different forms. Um, I think a lot of times there's all the technical stuff. Right, there's all of that, and just learning the tools, and that's part of the fun part is you get a few sessions in, and you can see like all the tumblers click into place. And they're like, oh, and you're like, oh, now you get it, right? Like that's super fun, and obviously they're learning a lot of new things. That's always a challenge. But I think that the more challenging part is when we talk to people about health, team health. Everybody's like, yeah, we're healthy, right? Like I get along to everybody, or for the most part, and that's the hardest thing to really break through is because, like you mentioned, critical feedback. People have learned where the hot buttons are, and most people that are well adjusted won't push those buttons very much, right? We kind of dance around those. Um, and that's the hardest part. Have the courage to step into that space and try to talk about the thing that nobody's wanted to talk about for a long time. And then realize it isn't as scary as it seems, and actually it's like a game changer. I think that feels like usually the hardest thing for people to really understand and get to.
Interesting. And is it like that moment? Like, is that generally what you would say is like the breakthrough moment in implementation or like really making progress? Is like once you've got that and everybody sees, oh, this is a safe space. Oh, we are like solving issues. Is that generally it?
Yeah, totally. I think totally because, so for example, let's say you got a people issue, right? Um, and until people are actually willing to talk about what the real issue is, you know, that people issue might not be the person, I mean, it may or may not be there, but there could be a lot of different reasons for that people issue. Um, and so often we get hung up thinking, I'm afraid to talk about that person because they'll think I think they're a bad person. Like, no, they could be an awesome person. You might love them as a human being and think they're the best person in the world, but they're just not the best person here. And until we can get people through that, you're not going to really talk about the really game changers in a business.
I struggled with that a lot, really at Hunt to Killer, and it was this idea that like we had really good people on the team, and there was this constant kind of internal debate with myself. Like, let's say we were missing a few rocks, or we were missing a few KPIs, or missing a few things on the scorecard. Like, I always had to go back to, is this me? Like, are we setting unrealistic expectations? Are we not setting the right rocks? Or is this person not the right person? Like when you're seeing that and you're seeing it from 10,000 feet and you're kind of orchestrating all of this stuff, like how do you help organizations look at that people factor and determine like, all right, we did the people analyzer, like it's the perfect person, but they can't hit a KPI or a scorecard to save their life. Like how do you help them navigate through the people issue?
It's a balance, right? Because on one hand, right, I've got a lot of years of experience and I've worked in different industries and different businesses, so I've seen a flavor of different things. And also working with other companies as my clients. But at the end of the day, I only see them 8 hours at a time every, every so often. I'm not there every day. And so I have to have that own humility about myself of thinking I'm not, be all end all. So there's that. But the other thing is you have to step into it and you kind of play like, for example, I had a client where we one session there was somebody that was kind of an issue, right? Was on the leadership team, but then they're not really on the leadership team, so they're no longer in sessions. But the name would kind of come up. It's like, okay, let's do a people analyzer. Did a people analyzer. All right, do you guys really think this like it feels like there's both a people issue and maybe a seat issue, right? A right person and a right seat kind of issue going on here. What do you think? Well, and so you kind of push on it, and then but you can't force it because if I try to force an issue, eh, it's not going to work, right? People get defensive, and so the next time person comes up again, we talk about it again, and so it's kind of a situational thing to know, right, how to push the boundary a little bit. Being careful, sometimes you can push too far and break the glass, and that's not a good thing. But sometimes you got to push hard, and so you just got to have the sense of it. I don't know how to, that's kind of how I approach it. But you have to have the bravery, as in my role, to actually point it out and say that we do need to talk about this. But at the end of the day, it's their business. They're the ones making the call.
You talked a little bit about this idea of like somebody was maybe at the SLT then came down. Like how do you see organizations? I This happened a lot for me. This might actually be a self-serving question, so I'll apologize to both you and the audience in advance. The organizations that I've run, um, I've been fortunate that they've grown very fast, and the chaos and the turmoil that always creates inside of the organization is a lot. The critical issue has always been the team, which is like the team that can build a $5 million company versus 10 versus 25 versus 50. Like the dynamics of that are constantly changing. What's your kind of philosophy or approach to that? Like if someone's brought onto the SLT and they qualified, they got it, they want it, they've got the capability, and they're the right person, they fit the core values and the behaviors of the organization, and then boom, like now we're beyond their capabilities. Like, uh, what's kind of your approach to that?
Where we have to go back to, right? We talk about vision, people, and data, and that's strong. The business becomes transparent. And so we have to point back to those things. So, okay, a person, you've are is the department they're running, the KPIs, the measurables that they're responsible for, are they hitting those or not? How are you measuring them? If they're not hitting their numbers, okay, what's that tell us? There can be a lot of reasons. It could be they're great at their job and I don't COVID happens and nobody's flying in airplanes. Well, right? You're not going to sell many spare parts to airplane companies at that point, or aviation companies. So there could be circumstances, but we got to have the data, right? And keep going back to that. It can't be a perception based thing because of, you know, whatever. And I think that's where it's got to go back to a lot of times is we've got to use their data going back to the tools, right? One of the sayings we use a lot, answers in the tools, go back to the tools, get them to look at the tools, make sure they're using the tools as well as they can, and they're being open and honest about those conversations. And when they're not using the tools well, and they're not being open and honest, then saying, okay, guys, coach time, you got to step up.
Do you look for, I realize like your background from the aviation and a lot of engineering, um like, do you have a certain kind of ideal client profile that you look for? Are you agnostic? Like, what do you look for in clients?
So I'm at heart, I am agnostic. Um, the thing that I love, so I've got, you know, nonprofits and all sorts of different people I work with, um, but the thing that always kind of it tickles a different itch is I I love working with people that make things, that design things. Um, so and I you know I come from I live in Seattle now, but or I live in Everett now, but I grew up in Iowa. Both my parents grew up on farms. I grew up in the country. First job I ever had was in third grade. I was on the back of the hay rack stacking hay for my dad. And I thought it was a blast. It was fun. I wasn't strong enough to lift it all the way up, but it was great, right? So I worked as a carpenter in college. So I have kind of this work with your hands, dirt under your fingernails, build stuff kind of mentality. And so I have a special place in my heart for people that actually are out there working hard and getting dirty, whether it's a factory, construction, all that kind of stuff. I like that, but I do work with everybody.
And do you look for people that are in and around the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, Everett, or are you like, listen, we live in the days of Zoom and we can do this anywhere?
I spent what 25 years traveling all over the world. I'd had clients on 6 continents, right? So I'd worked with people all over the world and traveled all over the place, and so I like to travel, and so I will work and actually like to go. Like I know people, I'll do virtual sessions and all that kind of stuff. I do actually like to go travel to people because I miss a little bit of that. Um, but I go everywhere.
All right. So someone just listened to this amazing recording, which by the way is not just your journey, but it's also like how you apply these different things throughout life, and then how that um translated into not just values, but this next chapter that you have of like making an impact. And I love what you said there, like titles and awards and all these different things. Like, yeah, sure. Like first half of your career, second half, like what good can I do and what impact can I leave? So someone just listen to the impact that you're making. Matt, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, you could call me old school 615-513-3892. That's a great way to get a hold of me, or matt.hansen at eosworldwide.com.
But thanks for taking the time and an hour out of your day to come on and share your journey, share this amazing knowledge and experience. And yeah, it was great.
I appreciate the opportunity. It was super fun. Thank you very much, Frank.